I reckon it all started when my folks decided to throw a barbecue over the summer. They enjoy hosting people now and then, probably because they've always been real social and like having company. At first, I told them I would rather not come. Truth be told, I do not get along with my two older sisters or their husbands, and spending the day with their wild kids sounded like a bad idea. My wife and I do not have children ourselves, and the whole scene just tends to wear us out. But Mom kept asking, and eventually my wife said maybe we should just go and make an appearance. So we went. When we got there, the place was already full of people. I counted around 20 or so, and my sisters and their husbands were clearly already deep into the booze. They were loud, laughing too much, and slurring a bit. Their kids, ranging from maybe 7 to 11 years old, were running wild. Mom spent all her time chasing them around, trying to keep them from knocking things over or jumping into the pool without asking. Dad, smart man that he is, had posted up in the whirlpool section of the pool with a little cooler of beer beside him, avoiding the chaos altogether. My wife and I tried to blend in and be polite. We chatted with some of the neighbors, grabbed some food, and each had a frozen margarita. I tried not to let my mood sour. Even when one of my brothers-in-law started complaining that we showed up late and were not in swimsuits like everybody else. He said we were ruining the vibe, whatever that means. Then came the first sign that the day was headed downhill. Two of my nephews came charging full speed at one of Mom's neighbors standing near the edge of the pool. They pushed her, but she caught herself and only ended up half-soaked. She was clearly upset but did not make a big deal out of it, just dried herself off with a towel and left. Meanwhile, my sisters and their husbands thought the whole thing was hilarious. No apology, no correction, just laughter. Not long after that, I was standing off to the side, having a conversation with a guy I had just met. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of 3 of the kids making a beeline straight for me. I knew exactly what they were up to. They wanted to shove me into the pool like they had tried with the neighbor. Luckily, I saw it coming and stepped aside just in time. All 3 of them went flying past me and tumbled straight into the water at full speed. At first, the scene looked kind of funny. Most of the guests around the pool started laughing, including my wife and me. But things took a sharp turn when it turned out that 2 of those kids could not actually swim. Even though they were wearing swim trunks and had been playing near the water all day, they just started thrashing around in a panic. Since I was wearing regular clothes and holding my phone, I didn't jump in. A couple of other adults quickly dove into the pool to fish the kids out. The kids were bawling, crying like they had broken bones or worse. It got loud real fast. And then came the yelling. My sisters, who were clearly more drunk than sober at that point, lost it. They started screaming at everybody, but especially at me. They said I should have caught the kids or let them push me in. One of them shouted that I nearly let her child drown. Then they started complaining that 2 of the kids had been filming the prank on their phones, which were now sitting useless at the bottom of the pool. One of my brothers-in-law jumped in, sloshing around trying to retrieve the phones, but he was so out of shape and drunk that he could barely keep himself upright. Nobody else was offering to help at that point, and honestly, I did not blame them. The way my sisters and their husbands were acting, no one wanted to get involved. That is when I told them flat out it was not my job to babysit their kids. I said if anything had happened, it would have been their fault, not mine. They did not like that one bit. The arguing got heated. My wife tried to calm things down, but it was useless. Things just kept going downhill after that. The shouting match got louder, and right when I thought it could not get worse, my other brother-in-law tried to stagger over and join in, only to trip over a patio chair and land face first on the concrete. He stayed down for a bit, groaning, while my sister rushed to check on him, still yelling at me over her shoulder. That was the moment my wife and I decided we had enough. We quietly said our goodbyes to my mom, who looked like she wanted to disappear, and we left. On the way home, my wife just shook her head. She is usually the one trying to give folks the benefit of the doubt, but even she had reached her limit. We both agreed that next time, we would not be guilted into showing up for one of these family events again. It just wasn't worth the headache. Later that night, we got bombarded with group text messages from my sisters. I read a few lines and immediately knew where this was going. They were calling me selfish, saying I ruined the barbecue, and complaining about the phones that got ruined. Their husbands jumped in too, backing them up with more ridiculous accusations. So we blocked them, all 4 of them. I had no intention of arguing over text like a teenager. My mom called shortly after, clearly upset. She had been in the group chat and read everything they sent. She apologized over and over, even though she was not the one at fault. I felt bad for her, but I had to draw the line. I told her we were stepping away from any future gatherings if my sisters and their husbands were going to be there. That next day, my parents called a sit-down with my sisters and their husbands. They told them to come over without the kids and lay things out straight. Mom said there would be rules going forward. What came out of it was a weak apology, relayed through my mom's phone, not even directly from them. My wife and I listened to it on speaker. She glared at me to stay calm, so I just said, "Thanks," and we left it at that. After that so-called apology, I figured maybe things would cool off, and we could all move on. So, I unblocked them, thinking maybe the message had finally gotten through. That same evening, I got a text from one of my brothers-in-law. He had the nerve to ask when I was going to pay for the kids' phones that got ruined in the pool. I could hardly believe it. I just texted back one word, "Never." Then I took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to my parents with a note saying we were done with this nonsense. I blocked them again, permanently this time. Then I told my folks, as gently as I could, that we were going no contact with my sisters and their husbands. I also asked them not to invite us to any family event if those four would be there. I could tell my parents were disappointed, but they understood. Dad got on the phone with my sisters that night and, from what I heard later, let them have it. He told them their kids were no longer welcome at his place and that the free babysitting days were over. He also told them they were no longer allowed to use the mountain house, the vacation home that, up until now, everyone believed belonged to my parents. That was when the bomb really dropped. My folks finally told my sisters that the vacation home actually belongs to me. My wife and I bought it for my parents a few years back because they had always dreamed of having a place in the mountains. We let them use it like it was theirs, and they decided who else could go up there. The plan had been to keep that little detail quiet, mainly to avoid this kind of drama. As you can guess, my sisters absolutely lost it. That house had become their personal playground over the years. They would go up for weekends, invite their friends, and treat the place like a free Airbnb. Now that the truth was out, it flipped their whole narrative. Suddenly, they were not just mad. I think they felt humiliated. And to be honest, I did enjoy watching the truth shake things up. A couple days after all that, my sisters actually showed up at our house uninvited. My wife and I were out to dinner, so they ended up leaving a handwritten note on our front door. One of them also called me at work the next day and left a voicemail, trying to sound all emotional, saying we needed to talk things through, for the sake of the family, of course. But I had already made up my mind. I was done playing nice. It had only been a few weeks since we blocked them again, and life already felt quieter. I had not realized just how much low-level drama they caused in our lives until it finally stopped. I used to get constant texts, subtle jabs, complaints, or requests from them, always something. But now, the silence felt like peace. And it reminded me that we had every right to live our lives without being dragged into their mess. But the story did not end there. A few days later, my parents called me again, this time with some new information that explained a lot. Turns out, my oldest sister had been secretly renting out the vacation house. She had been pocketing thousands of dollars a month by letting people stay there and pretending it was hers. She never asked permission. She just did it. When my folks told her she could not use the place anymore, she freaked out. She had to cancel a booking that was supposed to bring in a big chunk of money. That was when she admitted everything to my mom, including the fact that their finances were a mess. She and her husband were deep in debt, behind on their car leases, and one of their vehicles was on the verge of being repossessed. And just when I thought I had heard it all, my parents told me my other sister knew about the renting all along and had probably done it herself too. I once showed up at the house to drop off an ATV and found a group of people staying there. They said they were friends of my sister and that she had gone into town. At the time, I brushed it off. Now I knew better. My parents were completely overwhelmed by the situation. Mom was heartbroken, and Dad was downright angry. I could hear it in his voice when he explained everything. He said he felt betrayed, not just by what they had done, but also because he had tried to be fair with all of us. And now his own daughters were using something I gave him as a gift to make money behind our backs. It hit him hard. They told me they were expecting the sisters to try and talk me into letting them use the vacation house again. And they were right. That very week, both sisters showed up at my place again, this time without their husbands. They waited on my porch for me to come home from work. I pulled into the driveway, saw them standing there, and just sighed. I knew they would cause a scene if I ignored them, so I figured it was best to just let them in and hear what they had to say. Inside, they laid it on thick. My older sister started in about how much they were struggling financially and how the vacation house had become their only hope. They said I should let them use it again and that I needed to understand how hard things were for them. Then, As if that was not enough, they dropped another bomb. They told me I should start helping pay for their kids' college tuition. Their argument? That's what family does. I listened to them ramble for about 20 minutes before I had enough. I called them out, plain and simple. I told them I knew about the rentals, the money they made, and the lies they told mom and dad. Of course, they denied it. Then came the tears, the shouting, more blaming, more guilt-tripping. I did not raise my voice, but I made it crystal clear they were not getting another dime or another weekend at the cabin. Eventually, they left in a storm of crying and insults. I locked the door behind them and just sat there in silence. I felt completely drained, like every ounce of energy had been sucked out of me. It was not even about the money or the house at that point. It was about how little respect they had shown. That evening, when my wife got home, she could tell something had gone down. I filled her in, and she was furious. Not just because of what they said, but because they had the nerve to show up at our house again. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's it. No more." And I agreed. The next day, I drove up to the vacation property myself. I had already locked the gate with a chain, but I added a heavy-duty padlock, the kind you cannot cut through easily. Now, I was the only one with the key. Then I went ahead and reset all the door codes on the house. Every keypad got wiped and reprogrammed with new combinations. I even installed a set of security cameras with a system that alerts me the moment someone steps foot on the property. One of the cameras faces the long driveway, and another one looks out over the deck and yard. The guy who installed them was a former police officer who moved up there after leaving the force. He told me it was smart to be cautious, especially with family acting like that. Later that same week, both of my brothers-in-law tried calling me, separately. The older one, the loudmouth, was ticked off. He had apparently driven up there with some buddies for a guy's weekend and could not get in. When I didn't pick up, he left a voicemail bouncing between angry threats and whiny guilt. He even said I was ruining their side business. Can you believe that? He openly admitted they had been renting the place out to friends. I saved the message, of course. The other one sounded like he was being told to call. His message was short and almost apologetic, like he knew they had no leg to stand on. I texted back a simple message saying they were not welcome and that they needed to stop contacting me altogether. At that point, I started seriously thinking about selling the property. As much as my wife and I liked the place, we barely had time to use it. And now that the family had turned it into a battleground, it just didn't feel the same. I knew selling it would more than double what I paid for it, but I also knew it would be an emotional decision, and I wasn't quite ready for that. After mulling it over for a few days, I decided not to sell the cabin just yet. Instead, I hired a local guy named David to keep an eye on the place. He lives nearby and already manages a few other vacation homes in the area. I liked him right away, honest, dependable, and straight to the point. Plus, he has a dog that goes with him everywhere, and something about that gave me peace of mind. David agreed to do regular check-ins, walk the property every week or two, and handle any small repairs or maintenance that came up. He even gets alerts from the camera system and sends me pictures of the house, sunsets, and sometimes wildlife. Honestly, it made me wish I could be up there more often, but at least I knew the place was in good hands. Then came Thanksgiving. My sisters tried to pull another stunt. They wanted to use the vacation house again, like old times. They tried pressuring my parents into convincing me to allow it. But my dad stood firm and told them flat out he was not going to bother me about it because he already knew what my answer would be. So my folks came up with another plan. They offered to host Thanksgiving at their place or suggested that, if everyone split the cost, they could rent a cabin through an online rental site. My middle sister was open to it, but the oldest one had no money, so it turned into another family argument. When the deadline passed and no one had pitched in, the plan for the cabin rental fell apart. Thanksgiving ended up at my parents' house. My wife and I did not attend. We had already made it clear we would not be coming to any gathering where my sisters and their husbands would be. Later, my folks asked if we would consider holding off on selling the vacation place. They still wanted to use it now and then, and I had no problem with that. I told them they were always welcome, but I made it just as clear that my sisters were not. The calls from new phone numbers started up again. They left messages asking to work things out and find a way for everyone to use the cabin. We ignored them. At this point, I couldn't tell if they were just delusional or thought they could guilt-trip me back into submission. A few weeks passed, and I thought maybe things were settling down. But then, just when I least expected it, everything exploded again. It happened the day after Thanksgiving. My wife and I had spent the day with her parents, completely unplugged, phones off, just enjoying ourselves for once. When we got back to the car that evening, we turned on our phones and were hit with a flood of missed calls, voicemails, and texts. My parents, David, even the sheriff's department had tried to get in touch. My stomach dropped. I knew something bad had gone down. Turns out, both of my brothers-in-law had driven up to the cabin while we were away. They used an angle grinder to cut through the gate lock. They busted up the gate itself, then tried to force open the front door. They ruined the lock and gouged the wood. When that didn't work, they broke in through a side entrance and even went through the barn for some reason. The security system did its job. David got an alert from the cameras and immediately called the sheriff. By the time the brothers-in-law walked out the front door, deputies were waiting for them. David told me later that the two of them tried to talk their way out of it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But the deputies weren't buying it. The guys were arrested on the spot. Breaking and entering, property damage, making threats, all of it. David told me that one of them even said, right in front of the officers, that they were planning to beat the hell out of me when they saw me. Real smart. They were taken to jail, and their wives, my sisters, completely freaked out. They tried calling everyone, including my folks, trying to scramble for bail money. Problem was, it was a holiday weekend in a small town, and nothing was open. One of my sisters had maxed out all her cards. The other had to come up with bail for both husbands. By the time we got home and listened to everything, I was fuming. I called David for a full rundown, and he filled in all the gaps. Then I called the sheriff's department and told them plainly, I wanted to press charges. No backing out. No excuses. I barely slept that night. My mind kept spinning, flipping through everything that had happened. My parents called the next afternoon, sounding pretty shaken up. Mom was crying before she even finished her first sentence. She told me that my sisters had begged her to talk me into dropping the charges. They were saying it was all just a misunderstanding, that they didn't mean any harm, and that they only broke in because they were desperate. Dad got on the phone too. He was calmer, but I could tell he was upset too. He said maybe this had gone far enough and wondered if I would consider letting it go. That hit me hard. I hated being at odds with them. But I told them straight, I was not dropping anything unless I got a full repayment for the damage, and only after talking to a lawyer. Period. I still had not gone up to see the damage in person, mostly because I knew I would lose my temper when I did. The photos from David were already enough to make me grind my teeth. I ended up calling a couple of attorney friends to get advice and left messages asking for referrals. I was thinking about more than just pressing charges now. I was seriously considering suing my sisters and their husbands for everything: lost rental income, repair costs, emotional stress, the whole works. My wife, who had been patient through all of this, finally said she was done hearing about it. Not in a mean way, just completely exhausted. She told me it was up to me how I handled it, but she wanted no more involvement. I could not blame her one bit. Meanwhile, David had added even more security. He put up more signs warning about video surveillance and installed a lock on the water shutoff valve, just in case someone tried to be clever. We were the only ones with the key. I also learned something else. One of my brothers-in-law has a job that requires a security clearance. Getting arrested might end up costing him that clearance, or even his whole job. I was not rooting for that outcome, but part of me hoped it would finally make them realize just how far they had gone. Just a few days later, I got a package at my office, a thick envelope, delivered by courier. Inside was a signed letter from both of my brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. I read the letter twice. It was surprisingly humble. They admitted they had broken in, said it was wrong, and apologized. They said the money was to cover the damages and promised to pay more if the repairs ended up costing more. They also said they would stay away from the cabin unless my wife and I invited them personally. It was the first time either of them had taken responsibility for anything. They also asked if I would do whatever I could to get the charges dropped. They explained that their jobs could be at risk, especially the one with the security clearance. They were even open to signing a restraining order if that would help. It was a total turnaround from their past behavior. I had already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to discuss suing them, but I called and explained the new development. The lawyer agreed to meet sooner. We sat down for 2 hours and went over everything. His recommendation? Draft a settlement and mutual release agreement. He said we could almost certainly win in court, but it would take years, cost a lot up front, and even if we won, we might never see the money. He also said we could keep the $5,000 no matter what. He got started on the paperwork right away. The agreement would include a civil no-contact clause, basically like a restraining order without involving the courts. I asked David to get me a quote on all the repairs as soon as he could. He came back with a number just shy of $4,000. Most of that was for the front door and the damaged gate. The lawyer called both brothers-in-law and told them what we were proposing. They agreed almost immediately. One of them even said they could either pay a lawyer or pay us, but not both, and they figured a lawyer wouldn't help them anyway. We also reached out to the prosecutor's office. The attorney thought that with the brothers-in-law paying for everything and having no prior offenses, most of the charges would likely be dropped, possibly leaving just a trespassing misdemeanor. The agreement was finalized a few days later. On a Tuesday morning, I sat down with my lawyer, and we went through the final version line by line. It included everything we asked for: full repayment for the damages, legal fees, and a strict no-contact clause. It also made clear that if either of them violated the agreement in any way, we could go after them for everything they had earned from secretly renting out the cabin, along with added penalties. My lawyer sent it off to them, and by Thursday, they had signed. They even included another cashier's check for $2,500 to cover the attorney fees. I was not there when they signed, but my lawyer told me it was tense. Apparently, the brother-in-law with the security clearance was the one who took charge. At one point, he told everyone in the room to shut up, or he would walk away and make his own deal. Sounds like he finally got tired of the circus. The next day, I drove up to the cabin to see the damage with my own eyes and meet with the assistant district attorney. The broken door, scratches, the busted gate, it all hit me harder than I thought it would. I called a friend, vented for a while, and finally started to feel a bit better. The assistant district attorney listened to everything and agreed to drop all charges except trespassing. As long as they pled guilty and paid the fine, that would be it. He said that if they caused any more trouble, even a small one, it would not end well for them. Since they cooperated with the arrest, they caught a break. The sheriff's department had already done more than I could have asked for. I stopped by to thank them, and though I did not see the deputies themselves, I made sure my appreciation was passed on. David, the property manager, had done an outstanding job too. I let him know I was grateful for everything. My wife and I signed the final settlement agreement later that day. It felt strange, like ending a long, ugly chapter. We have not spoken to my sisters or their husbands since. They know better now. If they show up where we are, the agreement says they leave. No exceptions. We still let my parents use the cabin now and then, but things are different. They know the boundary. As for my sisters, I honestly hope I never hear from them again. I am not proud of how bad things got, but I am proud that I stood up for myself and my wife. We are finally at peace. And that, more than anything, was worth the fight.